Welcome to Hoffman's Hot Seat. I'm Tom Hoffman with One-to-One Media. Joining me today is Borge Hald, CEO of Medallia. Today we'll be discussing the top challenges and opportunities associated with multi-channel customer service. Borge, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me here, Tom. It's great to be on.
So what do you see as the biggest challenges as to how companies approach multi-channel customer service?
Really, the biggest challenge in multi-channel is complexity. Complexity is really the enemy of a great customer experience. If you think of your favorite Main Street store, oftentimes run by an individual proprietor, it's a great experience because it's relatively simple. As organizations grow and complexity grows, you lose transparency and decisions take longer. You get less personal. The people that are there are farther away from the vision of what the company is all about. And eventually, there's a lack of situational awareness in top management and throughout the organization about what's really going on. How are we really doing? And multi-channel just makes that even worse. If you're a chain of stores, that's complexity. But now you add the website, you start adding phone, and so on and so forth. Just the complexity makes it very difficult to achieve transparency and accountability. That oftentimes results in a very hierarchical, top-down type of management style that's quite impersonal and not something that most consumers, would really bond with or respond to. And this is where mediocrity happens.
Okay, thanks. So along with that, do you find that companies are often challenged to provide customers with consistent service experiences across various channels in which they're interacting?
Well, it's interesting. Clearly consistency is something to aspire to. But what we find sometimes is in the companies that we work with that do this the best is that they're actually okay with exceptions. They want the individual interactions to be good, and that may mean sometimes that you treat individual customers differently, and you may even sometimes deal with different channels differently because there are different customers that come in through different channels. Consistency is definitely something to look at. We don't think that you necessarily have achieved great just because you have consistency. I think in some ways the individual interaction, the quality of those all add up to the experience of the customer. In some ways that's kind of what we think that you need to think about it one by one.
Okay, thanks. So then going back to the issue of complexity that you were touching upon before, what are some recommendations for dealing with those issues?
We think step number one is about transparency. So if you go back to that Main Street store, there's transparency there because the person who owns it is in the store and sees what's going on and can coach and say to people, well, that particular interaction where we didn't take back that product, that's not really how we want to do business because we stand for great customer service. So in this situation, it's okay for us to take a loss. So there's transparency and knowledge by decision makers. So we think that step number one in these large, complex organizations is to create transparency. What we put in place for people are systems that capture customer feedback and systematically pushes that into every nook and cranny of the company so that every manager and every employee oftentimes can see exactly what the customers think about the interaction with their specific touch point, but they can also see what's going on in the rest of the company. You're ending up with a very open environment where performance is clear and accountability can happen. So we think that's step number one. Make it transparent and make it systematically be measured. The next step, which can happen afterwards, is really about engaging the front line. So we think that the experience happens at the front line, so the only ones that can really affect it are the frontline people. And they need to be empowered to make on-the-fly decisions. They need to be trained. They need to be the right people, and so on. And they also need to be accountable for taking the right actions and for making the right improvements. Eventually, what you're finding is the companies that truly excel are those that even go deeper and think of this as a cultural issue. So they hire the right people, they promote the right people, they train context rather than just functionality. So what's the vision of the company, and so on, so that the individual employees can actually make independent decisions and not just kind of script their way through the day. So those are kind of the three things that we've seen really distinguishes the companies that are able to be both complex because they're large, but also to be great at the same time.
Okay, thanks. Borge, can you speak to examples of companies that are providing multi-channel customer service particularly well?
I'll bring up one that we've seen really making fantastic improvements here, and that's a company called Best Western, which probably the listeners know. It's a hotel chain. It's a pretty unique hotel chain in that it's actually not a company. It's an association of very independent-minded hotel owners that have decided to join together and form a brand. And so decision-making in that company is about consensus in many ways. And they decided a few years back that they really needed to improve their image and the experience that they gave to their customers, because they saw that when one hotel gave a bad experience to a customer, the customer would punish all of the other ones as well. So they realized it was a group problem and they were going to deal with it. And what they did was they put in place a system to actually measure real-time experiences that people had at the different hotels. They then put in place a training program directed at the front line to teach them about, A, how do you take action when somebody has identified something that disappointed them and it didn't go well. You reach out, you talk to them, you record the problem, you bring it to the team, and then you find a way to actually close the loop and fix the problem for the future. And that initial training that was very much centered around the customer feedback program that they built, we could see the uplift on the system quite quickly. But the next step, I believe, is where really the magic happens, which is that now you're focusing on building a customer-centric culture. So we actually think that as you start doing these things, if you in addition now start thinking and changing who you hire, who you promote, how you reward people, who you hold up as examples of what your company should be doing, then that's how culture is created. And that's exactly what they did. They are still, of course, working on it, but they have a very, very ambitious goal. One of the biggest improvements that we have ever seen in our customer base. And then there's another company that we continuously are amazed by, and that is Apple. So if you walk into an Apple store or if you interact with Apple online, you'll feel like you are in a space or in a commercial situation with a much smaller company. It's much more intimate. They make exceptions all the time. They have people that seem to care about what they're doing. And I think that's an amazing achievement when you're operating at those scales. So both of those are really high complexity operations with a lot of changes, a lot of velocity in their business. They really sort of epitomizes what can be done.
And I would venture to guess that, say, in the case of Best Western, that if you follow up with customers and let them know that, at the very least, that you're taking action on their feedback, that it helps to build that type of relationship with a customer as well, to let them know that you're listening.
There's two things that happen there. If you call someone after they've filled out a survey, they're telling you this was great, but I was really disappointed with this. Once you now call them, and we don't actually recommend that you have your customer service rep do that. We think the manager should do that. Now you're actually understanding much more than I got a bad grade, I got a bad score from the customer. You understand what's going on, you understand what happened, and you understand the emotion from the customer. But the customer's going to feel great because you took the time. So clearly you value, you didn't have to reach out, but you did, so you value them. When you measure how much money you save on that, because the customer now actually will come back to you and the brand, there's a lot of money to be made doing that. But in addition, if it's a good manager is unable to sit and just listen to this without doing something about it. So if you, on an ongoing basis, expose good managers with sort of a bend to action to the voice of the customer, in some ways, they can't help but to act on it over time, if you allow them to do so. So we think that's kind of the critical first step.
Terrific. Well, Borge, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us on this today.
Thank you very much for having me on here. It was a real pleasure.